Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Christmas is supposed to feel warm. Like old wool socks, scratchy but comforting. Like the hiss of something good in the oven, and your dad humming some out-of-tune Nat King Cole while pretending to know the words. At least, that's how people describe it in movies, in commercials, in those fake Facebook posts with matching pajamas and perfect lighting. Our Christmas smelled like pine-scented floor polish and tension reheated from the previous year. I hadn't set foot in my mother's house since last Christmas, and even then, it was a quick 2-hour drop-in with a tight smile and a lie about having somewhere else to be. Which I didn't. I went back to my apartment, reheated frozen lasagna, and fell asleep halfway through a murder documentary. This year, I told myself I could handle brunch. Just a few hours. A bite of spiral ham, a sip of cranberry mimosa, maybe a civil nod toward Jenna's husband without punching him in the face. That was the goal. I even practiced my smile in the car. Not too wide, not too cold. Casual disinterest with a hint of, I've got a better life than you think. When I walked in, the house looked like a catalog. You know the kind. Fake garlands strung with obsessive symmetry, shiny ornaments that probably cost more than my rent, the whole place looking like it hadn't been lived in but just staged for judgment. Carol, my mother, was already in hostess mode, wearing one of those aprons that says something dumb like "slay all day" and her signature, "I'm glad you made it, but also disappointed in you" expression. She hugged me the way people hug a wet towel, barely touching and with a sigh. "Rachel, finally. You're 10 minutes late. We already started on the fruit platter." As if that was some kind of crime. I smiled politely, the way I'd learned to do, and muttered something about traffic. There was no traffic. I sat in my car for 8 minutes until I saw Jenna's SUV pull in, just so I wouldn't have to walk in alone. I still wasn't ready. Jenna floated in behind me, glowing like always. Same perfectly curled hair, same effortless makeup, same little squeaky laugh like a squeaky toy dipped in honey. She had on a green dress that looked tailored just for her. Her husband, Alan, trailed behind her with a bottle of wine and that too-slick grin I hadn't forgotten. He glanced at me, and I pretended I didn't see him. I hoped he'd choke on a piece of brie, and not enough people would care to perform the Heimlich. "Look who decided to join us," Carol chirped, gesturing toward the dining room like she was presenting a game show prize. The table was already set, of course. Silver chargers, cloth napkins shaped into roses, little pine cones spray-painted gold for some reason. Overkill, but that was the Carol brand. I took my seat at the far end, opposite Jenna, next to Uncle Pete, who already smelled like rum and aftershave. That man never changed. And weirdly, I liked that about him. For a while, we made small talk. Jenna talked about her kids' new piano lessons and the family's ski trip to Vail. Alan threw in some boring anecdote about work that no one asked for, and Carol corrected my table manners under her breath like it was the 1950s. It was fine. Manageable. Until the second round of mimosas. Carol cut her scrambled eggs with the side of her fork, looked up casually and said it. Just like that. No warning. No pause. "Your sister's doing so well. Why are you still alone?" The sentence slid across the table like a slap. Jenna's fork froze midair. Alan looked at his lap like he'd dropped something. I think even the damn dog outside stopped barking for a second. I looked at my mother, dead in the eyes. She wasn't joking. She never did. And she didn't blink. I let the silence breathe for a moment. Then I smiled, leaned back, took a slow sip from my glass and said, "I'm not. I just stopped inviting anyone who makes me feel that way." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse or cry. I just said it like a fact, like reading a grocery list. And the silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was loud. It rang through the room like church bells. Carol blinked twice. Jenna turned to me, her lips slightly parted, but nothing came out. Alan cleared his throat and then fake laughed like someone had told a joke, except no one had. Uncle Pete chuckled low, the kind of laugh that says, Well, shit, there it is. I picked up a piece of bacon and took a bite. The room didn't recover after that. The polite chatter was over. The eggs didn't taste as fluffy anymore. Jenna reached for her water twice, but didn't drink it. And Carol, she just kept her eyes on her plate like the scrambled eggs might somehow offer an escape route. Then, while everyone pretended to chew or pretend laugh or look anywhere but at me, Uncle Pete leaned in close. His breath was sharp with something brown and cheap. He wasn't drunk yet, but he was on his way. And in that low gravel voice only he could pull off, he muttered, "She doesn't know, does she?" I looked at him sideways, my expression still neutral, still careful. I said nothing, because what do you say to that when you're sitting at a table full of ticking bombs dressed up like family? But I knew what he meant. And I knew exactly what came next. The silence that followed my little truth bomb felt like thick static, the kind that makes your ears buzz and your skin itch. Everyone was suddenly too fascinated by their own plates, chewing slowly as if afraid even their molars might betray them. It was the kind of moment where time stretches thin, and you could swear 5 minutes passed between blinks. The smell of the glazed ham grew stronger somehow, or maybe it was just the awkwardness cooking under the surface. I counted 2 full sips of water, 1 fake cough from Alan, and exactly 0 apologies from my mother. That was about average for this family. And then Jenna spoke. Her voice cracked slightly at first, but she recovered quickly, smoothing it over with the confidence of someone who's used to keeping the peace at any cost. "Mom," she said, placing her fork down gently, "that wasn't fair. Rachel's doing fine. She's happy. You can't just say things like that." It took me a second to process that she was defending me, even slightly. It wasn't something Jenna usually did, especially not in front of our mother. Her role had always been to maintain the illusion, keep the house of cards standing with a smile and a Pinterest quote. But her voice trembled just a little, and her hands were clasped too tightly in her lap. That was the first crack in the porcelain. Carol sighed like a woman being inconvenienced by facts. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Jenna's got a wonderful husband, 2 beautiful children, a stable home, and a whole damn Christmas village in her foyer," I muttered, not even bothering to fake a smile. Carol pretended not to hear me, which was honestly her best coping strategy. Jenna shifted uncomfortably and Alan gave her knee a quick pat under the table, a gesture so rehearsed it made me nauseous. I looked away, suddenly tired. But then, like a memory snapping back into focus, I saw it. That night, the New Year's Eve party from hell. It had been at Mark and Tasha's house last December, one of those suburban adult parties where everyone brings expensive wine and pretends they're still interesting. I showed up late, tired from a deadline and more interested in the cheese tray than socializing. Jenna and Alan had been there, of course, glowing like the perfect couple in their Instagram-approved outfits. Carol was already telling people about Jenna's kids winning some spelling bee or mathathon, I don't remember. I was standing near the fireplace when Alan slid up beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed me one and said, "You look better every year, Rachel. Dangerous even." I thought he was joking. I laughed. Lightly. But then he leaned in and added, "Too bad you've always had such bad timing." He touched my wrist, just for a second, but it was enough to make my stomach turn. I froze. I didn't say anything in that moment. Not until the next day, when I called Jenna and told her everything. She didn't yell. She didn't deny it. She just went quiet. Then she said, "Please don't tell Mom. Or anyone. She'll blame me." I told her I didn't care about Mom. I cared about her. That he was her husband and she deserved better. She said, "You don't understand how things are. It's not that simple." And that was the last real conversation we had. Until this brunch. So yeah, when I looked across the table at Alan, all I could see was that slimy grin and the champagne in his hand, like a slow-motion rewind I couldn't pause. He raised his glass toward me now and winked. I felt my stomach twist again. I forced a sip of mimosa to keep from hurling the whole damn tablecloth in his face. Jenna and Alan have been married for over 15 years. Since their wedding in 2012, Carol chirped, as if reading his damn resume aloud. I looked up sharply. No one blinked. No one noticed. But I did the math. Out loud, in my head. That's only 13 years. Not 15. Not even close. And still, not one person flinched. It was like we'd all agreed years ago that math would bow to whatever fiction Carol liked best. Alan took a big bite of ham and moaned like it was a religious experience. God, this is good, Carol. Best ham yet. I muttered, let's hope it doesn't choke you. He grinned at me, and for a moment I swear I saw something flicker in his eyes, annoyance, maybe, or awareness. He remembered that I knew. And I remembered that he didn't give a damn. As the conversation shifted back to Jenna's kids, some recital or award or whatever, I felt my phone buzz gently in my lap. I didn't check it at first, just let it sit there. But then I glanced up and caught Alan doing the exact same thing, phone cupped in his palm, thumb moving quick. I don't know why I did it, maybe boredom, maybe instinct, but I stood up slowly, stretching like I was just getting comfortable. I passed behind Alan's chair, moving toward the kitchen to grab more coffee. As I did, I glanced down, just long enough to see the name on his screen. Baby Jim, not Jenna. Not even close. He turned the screen off fast, probably thinking I hadn't noticed. But I had. And worse, I knew that Jenna had probably seen it, too, many times. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. But she would be. And when she was, I'd be waiting. The sound of forks scraping across plates had taken on a rhythm, like the house itself was trying to fill the silence no one else wanted to break. The toast was supposed to be celebratory. Carol had announced it like she was presenting an award. She stood up, half-full glass of champagne raised in one hand, napkin still tucked into her collar like a bib, which would have been funny if she wasn't entirely serious. She looked around the table with that smug warmth she reserved for holidays and funerals, moments where everyone was expected to pretend love was easy and history didn't matter. I just want to say, she began, raising her voice half a notch, the way people do when they're playing hostess and dictator at the same time, how proud I am of my girls. She looked at Jenna and smiled like she was seeing her for the first time in months, even though they'd had lunch together last Tuesday. You've built something beautiful with Alan, sweetheart. The kids, your home, your life, it's all just... She trailed off with a shaky breath and wiped the corner of her eye, pretending she was overwhelmed with maternal pride and not her usual performance of emotion. Jenna smiled weakly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Alan squeezed her hand, and I could almost hear the rehearsed line forming in his throat, ready to be spoken like clockwork. I couldn't have done it without her. But he stayed silent, sipping his champagne like it was just another form of evasion. Carol turned her gaze toward me then, the shift in her expression barely noticeable, but sharp enough to cut glass. And Rachel, she said, softer now, like my name was something she had to practice pronouncing. You've always marched to your own drum. And I suppose there's value in that too. I raised my glass, but I didn't drink. I just held it there, like a prop, and smiled, the kind of smile you wear when your patience is a thread from snapping. Don't let your voice crack, Mom, I said, and Jenna coughed into her napkin so quickly it might have been a laugh. Or maybe it was panic. That was the moment it all started to feel too tight, the air in the room, the collar of my sweater, the memories clanging around in my head like bells I couldn't silence. I drifted back to that phone call last year, the one where Jenna had cried into her Bluetooth headset as she drove in circles around her cul-de-sac to keep her kids from hearing. She'd begged me not to say anything to Carol, swore that Alan was going through a rough patch, like he was a failing career or a bout of eczema. I remember every word. She'll blame me, Jenna had whispered, low and terrified. She always does. I hadn't said much in return, just listened. That was all I ever did when it came to Jenna, listen, absorb, carry. I'd carried a lot over the years. Her secrets, her panic, her shame wrapped up in pretty bows for the world to admire. And for what? So our mother could continue parading her around like a trophy, while I sat on the sidelines like an overdue library book nobody wanted to check out. Back at the table, the champagne was already losing its fizz. Alan leaned toward me slightly, as if the moment had thawed just enough for him to slide back into his old patterns. "You look good, Ratch," he said under his breath, just low enough so that only I could hear. "That sweater's flattering." I tilted my head, keeping my eyes fixed on his. "Thanks, Alan," I replied coolly. "You still texting your gym girlfriend, or was that just a holiday treat?" He blinked and it was brief, but it was there, the flinch. A tiny flash of uncertainty, the kind that betrays a man who's not used to being confronted. He looked down at his plate, then back up with that fake little laugh he used like duct tape. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said too quickly. I nodded slowly, biting down on a smile. "Sure you don't." Carol interrupted just then, her voice slicing through the tension like a bread knife. "Rachel, I thought you might be bringing someone this year," she said brightly, a forced sweetness coating her tone like powdered sugar on a dry cookie. "A friend, maybe? A companion?" I tilted my head, pretending to consider her words like they were worth more than dust. "You mean like a date?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, I figured I'd spend the holiday surrounded by people who already disapprove of my life. Why double the fun?" The room went still again. Jenna set down her glass too hard, and it clinked against her plate. Alan shifted in his chair, clearly annoyed that attention had drifted from him. Carol's lips tightened, the way they always did when she was reminded I'd inherited my father's mouth and not her sense of diplomacy. That was when I stood up. I didn't announce anything, didn't storm off or raise my voice. I just quietly excused myself to stretch my legs, whatever the hell that meant. I walked over to the Christmas tree in the corner of the living room, all white lights and gold ornaments, not a single piece out of place. The kind of tree you see in department stores, designed to impress rather than inspire. It was beautiful and also completely empty of joy. I reached for a strand of tinsel near the top, one of the delicate metallic ones that clings to everything it touches. I rolled it around my fingers, then casually slipped it into my coat pocket. Jenna saw me do it, and so did Alan, though neither said a word. "Just in case I need a little sparkle for later," I said softly, turning back toward the table with a faint smile. Alan stared at me, not laughing anymore. Just watching, like he knew something was coming, but couldn't quite put his finger on what. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The brunch had officially shifted into that uncomfortable middle stage where everyone was too full to keep eating but too tense to leave the table, as if the chairs had developed invisible seatbelts powered by guilt and obligation. The ham was half gone, the mimosas had turned warm and flat, and the kids, blissfully oblivious, had retreated upstairs to fight over a video game that would inevitably end with one of them crying and the other smugly denying involvement. It was the adults who were breaking now, and it started with the soft clink of Uncle Pete pouring himself another drink. He didn't ask for permission. He never did. The man had been a functional alcoholic since I was 9 years old and had perfected the art of being both ignored and impossible to forget. He had this way of sneaking up on moments like a storm cloud you'd almost convinced yourself wasn't coming. Carol had seated him near the end of the table as usual, under the framed cross-stitch of Psalm something or other, like proximity to scripture might clean him up. Pete swirled his whiskey in a chipped glass and cleared his throat, which already felt ominous. "Hell of a ham," he said, voice low and scratchy. "Hell of a ham, Carol. You still using that glaze with the brown sugar and lies?" Alan laughed too quickly, probably assuming Pete was drunk enough to be harmless. Carol shot her brother-in-law a glare sharp enough to skin a deer. Jenna looked like she wanted to vanish into her chair cushion, and I leaned back with my hands behind my head, waiting. Because I knew Pete. He was winding up. "What's that supposed to mean?" Carol snapped, still trying to keep her tone light, as if sarcasm were some kind of contagious rash. Pete shrugged, his mouth twisting into something resembling a grin. Means we all pretend real good, that's what. Every year, same tree, same ham, same damn denial. It's a tradition now. You've had too much, Carol hissed, reaching for his glass, but he pulled it back and sipped again like it was communion. I've had enough, he said, waving her off. Enough to say what nobody else will. That golden boy down there, he pointed a shaky finger at Alan, who stiffened like a mannequin, been playing around for years. You think nobody notices? Come on. The words hung there, toxic and undeniable, like cigarette smoke in a sealed car. Jenna froze. Alan turned red in the cheeks, not from shame but from calculation, trying to figure out the best version of fake outrage to sell. Carol stood up halfway and then thought better of it, sitting back down with a huff like this wasn't the first time the family's dirty laundry had aired between courses. Don't be ridiculous, she said sharply. Alan's a wonderful husband and father. He coaches soccer, for God's sake. Yeah, Pete muttered. And after practice, he gets real hands-on. Jenna let out a sound, half laugh, half sob, and quickly wiped at her face like the emotion had slipped through before she could pin it down. Carol noticed, of course, but she focused on me instead, like she always did when things got uncomfortable. Rachel, she said, voice full of false composure, maybe it's time to stop with your little comments. I know you've always had issues with your sister's husband, but dragging this out in front of the family is cruel. I haven't said a word, I replied calmly, placing my glass on the table with deliberate care. Yet. Then what are you doing? Carol demanded, exasperated. Why are you even here if all you want to do is stir up drama? That's when I smiled, slow, deliberate, almost lazy. I'm just here for brunch, Mom. You invited me. I showed up. I've been on my best behavior, haven't I? Carol's eyes narrowed. You're never on your best behavior. That's rich coming from the woman who once told me I'd die alone because I didn't bring cranberry sauce to Thanksgiving. I snapped, and the temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. Jenna suddenly stood, her chair scraping the hardwood floor with a screech. Her eyes were shiny now, red-rimmed and terrified, but she still wasn't speaking. Her hands were clenched at her sides like she was physically holding something in. I turned to Alan, who had picked up his phone again, probably trying to text someone named Baby, Jim, a few reassuring lies. Tell them, Alan, I said, voice cold and even. Tell them what you whispered to me last New Year's Eve. Tell your wife. Tell my mother. Or should I? He stared at me, jaw tight, nostrils flaring. He didn't speak. Of course he didn't. Men like Alan never confess until they're cornered, and even then, they do it like they're offering a gift instead of revealing a rot they created. Carol gasped, looking from Alan to me, completely confused and still, somehow, trying to preserve the image of control. Rachel, you've had your little moment. Now please, oh no, I said, standing slowly. This isn't a moment. This is a reckoning. A year ago, at Mark and Tasha's New Year's party, your favorite son-in-law here told me I looked dangerous. Then he grabbed my wrist and told me it was too bad I had bad timing. Like I was just late for a ride on his goddamn ego. Jenna covered her mouth with her hands. Alan turned pale. Pete whistled low, like someone watching a slow train wreck. And when I told Jenna, I continued, louder now, she asked me not to tell anyone. Because, quote, she'll blame me. She always does. And she was right. Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled out of water. That can't be true. Jenna? And then it happened. Jenna looked at her mother, really looked at her, and through the tears and the trembling lips, she said something I never expected, something that cracked the room right down the middle. I didn't lie for him, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I lied for you. The room went still. So still I could hear the damn pine needles falling off the tree behind me. Alan looked stunned. Carol looked betrayed. Pete took another sip like he'd been waiting for this exact drama his whole damn life. And me? I just stood there, watching the whole beautiful, burning mess unfold. The silence that followed Jenna's confession was not the kind that invited peace or reflection, but the kind that clung to your ribs like wet clothes after a storm, heavy and embarrassing and cold. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the whole house had suddenly turned into one of those snow globes sitting on the mantel, frozen mid-chaos, and someone had just shaken it violently. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, chin trembling, eyes red, hands clenched like they'd been holding something for far too long. And then I looked at my mother, Carol, who was still standing there, mouth open, face frozen in disbelief or denial or maybe just the full body shock of losing control of a narrative she'd rehearsed for years. My voice stayed quiet, but every word I spoke next landed like a rock through glass. So, there it is, I said, not even looking at Alan anymore. There's your golden family, Mom. Covered in glitter and rot. Carol blinked like she was trying to blink the whole moment away. Jenna. I didn't tell you to lie, she said, but her tone didn't sound like a denial. It sounded like a negotiation. Jenna didn't flinch. She just stared back at her like a child who's finally outgrown the need to be forgiven. You didn't have to tell me, Jenna said slowly, her voice like broken glass underfoot. You just made it clear. Every single time something went wrong, it was easier to blame Rachel than to admit we weren't perfect. I did what I thought you wanted. What you always wanted. Pete shifted in his chair and I could feel his eyes on me, but he didn't speak. For once, he didn't need to. Carol sat down slowly, like her legs could no longer hold up the version of reality she'd built brick by brick and covered in holiday wreaths. Her gaze dropped to the table, not even pretending to make eye contact anymore. I reached into my bag without saying a word and pulled out the gift I'd brought her. It wasn't wrapped. I didn't bother with ribbon or bows or even a card. Just a simple black frame, no embellishments, cold and clean like a courtroom photo. I set it gently in front of her, right next to her untouched mimosa and half-eaten ham. She looked down, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't recognize what she was seeing. But the way her face twisted, tight, wounded, embarrassed, that told me everything I needed to know. It was a photo of Alan, smiling too wide with his arm wrapped tightly around a woman half his age, somewhere sunny and smug, standing in front of a bar that definitely wasn't local. The timestamp in the corner, clear as day, read 2 days ago. Someone I know works at that resort, I said, almost conversationally. She thought I'd want to know where my brother-in-law spends his business trips. Alan cursed under his breath, finally breaking his silence with a pathetic, "This is bullshit," but nobody even turned to him. Not Jenna. Not Carol. Especially not me. I looked at Jenna, and for once, she wasn't the polished wife or the perfect daughter or the exhausted mother trying to hold everyone's lives together with glitter and duct tape. She was just my sister. No filters. No script. And the way her eyes welled up told me that somewhere in that moment, something inside her cracked open too. Carol stared at the photo for a long time, as if by staring hard enough she could change its meaning or erase it completely. She didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She just looked at it like it was a test she'd failed without realizing she was even being graded. I leaned down and kissed her cheek, cold, perfunctory, deliberate, and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Mom." And then I walked out. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't look back. I didn't need a grand exit or some dramatic door slam. I just stepped out into the cold afternoon, the sky gray and low, the wind slicing across my face like truth finally catching up with fiction. The air felt sharper than before, not just because of the weather, but because something had shifted, something permanent. Inside my car, the seat was cold and the silence even louder than it had been at the table. I started the engine, but I didn't drive. I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, breathing, letting it all settle in my chest like dust after demolition. That piece of tinsel I'd stolen from the tree was curled on the dashboard now, catching what little light filtered through the windshield. It shimmered like something pretending to be valuable, pretty, but ultimately disposable. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. One message. From Jenna. Thank you. Just those 2 words. No emoji. No explanation. Just the kind of message that carries everything and nothing all at once. I didn't reply. I didn't know if I should. I just stared at the screen like it might answer something I hadn't dared ask. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see the house, the windows glowing like a Norman Rockwell lie. I imagined them all inside, still pretending to find footing on a floor that had just been pulled out from under them. I didn't feel satisfaction, not exactly. Just relief. A quiet, cold kind of relief that maybe, finally, I didn't owe anyone the version of myself they kept trying to stuff into a too small holiday sweater. I glanced back at the tinsel, glittering on the dash, twisted and absurd. Some gifts you don't return. You just let them burn.